All right, welcome back. We're in the penultimate selection chapter right now, selecting elements to style part 4. So I want to talk now about specificity. So selectors can be combined to achieve greater specificity. We've seen this in a couple of examples, and trust me, you need to learn this. So here we have a couple of combined selectors. The first one combines a type selector of div with an ID selector of hash content. So it selects any div with an ID equal to content. And then we have two list items, li.first and li.last, which select list items with a class value of first or last respectively. It's just important to know that the specificity of a selector is cumulative. So we can calculate specificity by saying the universal selector has a specificity of 0. Types and pseudo-elements have a specificity of 1. Classes, pseudo-classes, and attributes have a specificity of 10. And IDs have a specificity of 100. Now I'm throwing out these numbers because they make it relatively easy to calculate the specificity of one selector versus another. In reality, those are actually infinity. So types and pseudo-elements are infinitely more specific than the universal selector. Classes, pseudo-classes, and attributes are infinitely more specific than types and pseudo-elements. And IDs are infinitely more specific than classes, pseudo-classes, and attributes. Of course, doing math with infinity is a little bit of a challenge, so this is a good rule of thumb. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is if you were to chain 10 classes together, that would not be equal in specificity to an ID, even though 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 and so on is 100. So which of these selectors is the most specific? Without a doubt, it's the one that includes the ID selector. So let's do a couple of examples calculating specificity. We'll start with the div. It has 0 IDs, 0 classes, attributes, and pseudo-class selectors, 1 type or pseudo-element because it has a type selector for div, so its specificity would be 1. Now li.vEvent has 0 IDs, 1 class, and 1 type. Therefore, it has a total of 11. Because as you remember, classes have a specificity of 10 in this calculation. So 10 plus 1 is 11. Hash content has 1 ID, 0 classes, attributes, or pseudo-classes, and 0 types or pseudo-elements. Therefore, it has a specificity of 100. So it's way more specific than either of the previous two selectors. In the third example, hash content space li space a, we have 1 ID selector, no classes, and 2 types for a value of 102. And then finally, hash content square brackets role has 1 ID, 1 attribute selector, and no type selectors for a total specificity of 110. So let's talk about what these combinations mean. The first type of combination, apart from actually selecting the same exact element, is descendant selectors. This is selecting an element based on its context within an ancestor. So we've seen this where one selector is separated from another with a space. So hash content space p selects any p element that is a descendant of an element with an ID of content. In the second example, div hash content space ul space li.last, this selects any list item with a class of last that is a descendant of an unordered list that is a descendant of a div with an ID of content. That's a very specific selector. And here we see those style rules applied. Now, child selectors select based on a parent context as opposed to just a general ancestor context. So if I wish to say hash content greater than p, that says that it wants to select any paragraph that is a child of something with an ID of content, and it's going to turn it red. Now in the second example, it's going to select any list item with a class of last that is a child of a div with an ID of content. So when we go over to our page, you see that the paragraphs are red, but nothing is blue. So why didn't this apply? Well, the reason that it didn't apply is that the div with an ID of content has a UL within it that contains the list item. The list item is not a child of the div. The list item is a child of the unordered list. And it is a descendant of the div with an ID of content. So we could change the selector to say we want to select any list item with a class of last that is a child of an unordered list that is a descendant of content. And then our styles apply. So in this chapter, we talked a little bit about specificity calculation, descendant selectors, and child selectors. In the next and final selection-based chapter, we're going to look at adjacent sibling selectors, general sibling selectors, and specificity calculation with combinators like these. We'll see you in a few.